Hey, he's sitting up there. That means he has more authority than me.
I'm the boss of this company. Yes, we are a real company.
Are you hiring?
Not currently. We are hiring Tricker Website.
Settle disputes with Mortal Kombat.
Hey, it was funny as on the back of the cards, it's both their business card and his cosplay business card. So it's
Nice.
I should put half of them and then half of them. No. People are already coming in. I don't be bothered. Two. Who's gonna chill here? Real quickly.
Same.
I'm so excited for them.
It's fun.
Because they're starting to campaign. I'm so happy for them planning this. Oh, so happy. So people. I'm like an excited mom. You watch this for enough years to get excited when they get there. You gonna do great, boys.
Well, no, I think it's like stretched all day. Seems like
You're ruining the illusion of power.
The front row's over there.
Our power. It's an illusion.
Oh my gosh. We're getting
When I did my first panel, I thought it was just great that people showed up in the first place.
Well, he's had 3 panels this weekend. The guy in the Scorpio costume. Scorpio girl. So, like, I'm happy that people have been coming, but I'm so happy at 8 o'clock. You know, this makes me ecstatic. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Of course. Even better. Good.
I'm gonna set this
Recording right now?
yes. I'll chop off the front.
She was like, I forget where I got it. He goes, oh, I came in the morning. You've been around.
Yeah. All right. Well, the doors are closed. No one is
But actually, she was responsible.
Say those are all right. You might as well start.
Hello? Hello, yes. So, welcome to the Intro to Programming and Game Design panel, presented by the Forge Game Studios LLC. That is our company. I am the founder, CEO, and lead designer. Yes, we do. I remember that. Yes, Forge Games Studio LLC. We are officially registered, and we started back in 2016. As I said, I'm founder, CEO, lead designer, and I also do like a shit ton of other stuff in the company.
Can't really hear you in the back.
Is it really having that problem again? It's been doing this every time I panel. I'm the founder, CEO, and lead designer of the Forge. I also do many other things. These are my employees. If you guys introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Liam McAlevey. I am the lead writer and sound designer at the Forge.
And I am Isaac Alter. I am the lead level designer and the scriptwriter of the Forge. Basically, I try to be funny. I really try.
You're still not doing a good job. We do have another team member, Connor. He's our lead artist and graphic designer, but unfortunately he couldn't be here this weekend because of financial issues. So yeah, he might get fired. We'll see. So in terms of some of our current game projects and stuff that we've kind of published, the first thing was back in 2016, 2017.
Yeah, it was. I was working on a capstone project for the game design program down in Colorado Springs. But I wanted to make it, since I love to do game writing, I wanted to make a visual novel with as many branching paths as I could in 4 months, which was very, very difficult, and I shouldn't have done it. But it is currently playable. I'm still updating it. So.
Yes, that was the first thing that I kind of published, just because for the capstones we had to publish them in some way. The second one was actually my capstone. called Eretha's Influence. Still need to make better title graphic for it, but whatever. It's a kind of puzzle-solving game where you're trying to convert all the tiles on the board to one type. It is available. A PC demo is available on our site, and it is available on Android right now. So if you want to check it out, feel free to. It also helps support us. But the main thing that kind of started the company back in 2016 that we've been working on this whole time is our first game called Chaos Theory Entropy. Still in development. Hopefully we'll release it later this year. In terms of what the gameplay is, it's first-person environmental puzzle solving using a time mechanic where you jump between 3 different states of time to like solve the puzzles. It's present, future, and further future, and it's kind of like a lot of interaction between those things. But since you guys are probably here just to kind of start to see, you know, what's it like to start making games or even start a company based off games, like where should you start looking at? What sort of things should you do? And well, one of the biggest parts of making a game is programming, obviously, and programming can be very difficult and tricky for people, especially to like to learn. But I say kind of a steep learning curve.
It can be, but there's definitely places to start. I mean, obviously, there is no game without code. So if it's not something that's in your skill set, I do encourage everyone, if you are thinking about getting into the games industry, to learn at least some code, because it is a shared language for like a whole company to talk about, you know, where you're going to put your files, how you're reading stuff in, all that stuff. But there are some great places to start with that, and some good languages to learn that are used throughout the whole industry. So.
And if you try and you find that it's not for you, at least you'll have an in. You'll meet some people, and maybe you'll find something that you can help with. So yeah, it's a good place to start.
Exactly.
And if you're looking for like a good jumping point for code, one of the more simplistic languages to learn is Java. And if you want to kind of take that further, you can learn JavaScript. That is like a much more evolved version, but Java is a good way to kind of start to feel like what is coding in general. Even if it's not for game design or any sort of major software, you can at least kind of feel it out. Some of the bigger things for actual game design, C++, a lot of AAA games that a lot of you play is C++. What we mainly use though is C#, because it's an object-oriented programming language, which is very, like, it makes sense for games, because like a lot of stuff in a game is an object. And that's what the Unity engine, which a lot of you probably heard about or seen or played games that use Unity. A lot of indie games are run off Unity. Python's also a pretty decent one. It's a little bit trickier to get for a game, but still pretty solid. One of the biggest things about coding is always keep up with it. Like, try and do it daily, even if it's just like little things, or if you're just reading through forums or other stuff to like just kind of learn new little bits. Anything else you guys want to add to about programming?
I think that about covers it. Yeah.
All right. Engine. So another good starting place for like a game engine, because if you're starting an indie game company, I don't recommend building an engine from scratch. That's a lot of code as is. We do know a few people who have done that, and I kind of think they're lunatics, but I respect them a lot for it.
Who wants to build the rules to a whole universe?
Yeah. If you try and build it from scratch, you'll end up with Bethesda's game engine.
Yeah, the creation.
Just have everything buggy and stuff. But a good starting point is GameMaker Studio. It doesn't use like any major programming languages. You can use this drag and drop system, just kind of like make the game, but not have to deal with any heavy coding. It's great for prototyping as well, so you can start to feel out like what your game is going to be and how it's going to run. Like I said, Unity. It's free, and it's great for like just learning how to like make a game without having to worry about doing all of the back-end engine stuff or anything like that. And it just works really well for a lot of things. It's very powerful, and a lot of people kind of underestimate it, but if you start to dive into it really deep, you can do a lot. If you want to get into actual heavy-duty stuff, Unreal is a pretty decent one. CryEngine. CryEngine, that one's...
CryEngine's tough.
Yeah.
It's I think both on Unreal and CryEngine, they're very powerful, but I like to refer to them as sniper rifle engines because they're really good and really strong at very specific tasks.
Unreal, I'd say, is definitely more accessible, though. So if you're looking for a jumping point from Unity to something else,
Yeah,
I would recommend Unreal.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that too. One of the biggest things I hear about CryEngine is like the only people that know how to use it are the people that made it, and it seems very apparent and kind of actually true.
Yeah.
So if you want to kind of torture yourself and learn a complex engine, try Cry. Or if you're doing indie games, do Unity. Like seriously. Visuals. If you're just starting to make games, you don't have to worry about making it like look like, you know, Smash 4 or Skyrim or anything recent. Like you're just kind of learning. You're just, right now. You're not trying to like publish some game right away. You're just feeling it out. So don't be afraid to just make basic shapes in like Photoshop or GIMP or anything. Just keep it simple and just start to learn programming in the engine. And later on, you can start to evolve your art and play around with it more. Play around with like animations and stuff. Changing the final art. Definitely, like if you are like actually building the full game at a certain point, it's good to like have your art be solid up front. So like once it gets closer to release, you don't have to worry about like, oh, I don't like the way anything looks, and I have to redo it all, because that's dozens and maybe even hundreds of hours of work you're gonna have to like do. So it's best to kind of get like the solid basis on the start. A lot of bigger companies though, they usually have like the programmers building the game with like programmer art, as it's called, which is just the very basic stuff, while the artists are, you know, spending hundreds of hours modeling, animating, whatever else, and then they kind of implement it, 'cause it's been kind of working side by side. But if you're an indie team, you don't really have, you know, dozens of artists on hand to do that, so you may need to kind of do it like one step at a time rather than side by side. And one of the biggest things too that kind of falls flat for a lot of indie games is they don't really test it enough. There's not enough like iterating through it, because they might think that what they have is solid and plays well, but if you're playing your own game, you're going to think it's good because you don't want to think poorly of it and feel like you wasted your time. So always reach out to like other people, friends, family, or even like other people you don't know, because they will be your best like feedback for what's wrong with the game, why it doesn't play well or why it isn't fun or anything. And yes, you will hear people say your game is not fun. That's okay. You can disagree with them. I've done that with people, but it's fine. It's still feedback in a way.
And it's part of the process too, because I think one of the biggest things is, you know, you do need to get your game out there as soon as humanly possible. As soon as it's playable, as soon as you have a level, start testing, start getting it in people's hands to figure out if there's anything that you need to change or anything that you need to rework, anything you need to abandon early, because it's really easy to abandon if you've been working on it for 2 weeks. It's really hard to abandon when you've been working on it for 2 years.
Well, I'm going to be saying that a lot too. Yeah. Get it out there.
Yeah,
Yes.
Do it.
it's very important.
Yes. Don't be afraid to put it out there, because that's kind of the whole point, is you want to release this product for people to enjoy. So you want to make sure they enjoy it first before you just throw it out there and no one buys it. Alright, so what exactly goes into a game? Some of this is pretty obvious, but it's good to like hit on and think about. Obviously the biggest thing, and this is like what I focus on the most, is the mechanics and features of the game. I always put the actual game first in a video game. That's something some other designers and stuff seem to overlook or lack on. A lot of these mechanics, you know, this is where programming really comes in. It's, you know, how you make it work, how you make these things happen. And it's honestly what makes the game a game. It's what makes it fun and unique and interesting. And that's kind of what people are here for. Like, they want to buy your game because of the mechanics and stuff. If it's just very simple or smaller things. And then after you get like your main mechanics and stuff down, you can start figuring out the smaller things that kind of help tie everything together and make the game it's supposed to be. Because you might just think of like one main mechanic, but then you don't realize that there's dozens of other smaller things that kind of make it work, or kind of make the world or surrounding environment work. So like a lot of things will be labeled as a mechanic even if you don't initially think it's a mechanic. And then level design is kind of the biggest thing too, a part of it, because that's what kind of ties it all together and makes it happen. It's what makes the game, the game. Art. It's very much up to you on what kind of game you're going for. If it's just 2D art, sprites, and simple animations. If it's full-on 3D models and animation. Obviously animations as well that kind of go with it if you use any. Some games don't really have any sort of animation, but it's kind of a big thing nowadays. And other sort of graphical art and UI art, which is like menus, your heads-up display, and other little like icons and stuff that you don't usually think too much about, but it kind of helps flush it out. Sound of music, sound effects, some of the stuff that you kind of just put in the back of your mind or like you don't pay too much attention to while playing a game. The music, that can really set like the ambience and tone for the game. But that's also kind of depending on what type of game you're making, but it can still have a very powerful impact on it. Voice acting, if you're doing any, a lot of indie games usually don't do voice acting just because it's hard to get like a good enough voice actor and then having to get recording time and then editing the sound and implementing it. It just goes on. Story and dialogue. The thing I'm worst at, I have these two. Honestly, like I focus so much on the game that I suck at writing a lot, but all the pieces to it, I know I'm just not good at doing it. Like the World Bible, which Liam kind of
we'll touch on that stuff a little bit more in detail later. But it depends on how much you want to focus on writing in your game. Obviously, you don't even need writing if you're going to make something simple and it's just a little puzzle game. But some games focus entirely on it, and I'll talk about that a little bit later.
Characters, obviously, like most games have a character of some sort, even if it is like a basic shape. Like, does that have like some sort of personality to it or anything like that? Or if it is like a fully fleshed character, it's like here's their life story. Speaking of life stories, lore and background. What's the story of the world or just the area you're working in? Like, if you need to have that level, if like you have built a kingdom of some sort, if you're trying to do like Fire Emblem or something ridiculous. And the dialogue, which a lot of that is kind of like what the characters say, how they say it, or like who they're speaking to and their interactions with them. It's kind of Isaac's main thing too.
Yep, I'll be talking about that later as well. Basically, script writing. Again, I'll talk about it later. You have to wait.
How dare you make them wait. And of course the actual story, the narrative of what you're trying to tell. If you have like a main overarching story or many branching paths that you're trying to do by yourself, like an idiot.
Look, I tried, all right? I learned my lesson.
Yeah, good. And then user interface, which also kind of ties back to the art. In some ways, like the heads-up display, like sort of what information do you want to show at any time or all the time. So like kind of what information you're giving back to the players, like like health, points, whatever, and ammo if you're doing like a shooter. Even things like the actual button mapping and the controls, that's user interface because what the player uses. Like what do the triggers on the controller do? What do the A and B button do? Stuff, or even what's the keyboard and mouse do? It's what's comfortable and feels right for the game. What do people like to use? Which also is where feedback comes in, because you might set up these controls like, oh, I like these controls, but then you have 100 people testing it, like these controls are dumb. Why'd you set it up like this? And you're like, oh, okay, I'll have to change it then.
Yeah, I heard a funny anecdote about that. There was a game team that was trying to make an RPG, and when they got to the testing phase, their testers could not figure out how to open the menu. It took them hours and hours. They finally asked the dev team. The dev team said, oh yeah, you triple click on your character. I'm sorry, what?
What, you don't think that's normal?
Yeah, I don't know.
That sounds fine to me.
Oh, it's supposed to be 5 clicks.
Yeah.
Who designed this game?
Just because the controls make sense to you does not mean they will make sense to everyone else.
And some other things that like kind of fall behind or like people don't always think about too much while like building the game. Some of the biggest things is like the code efficiency, like how well does the actual thing run, which a lot of that's based off the code. The compatibility, because you might be like developing it for like one thing. Like when I was developing Eartha's Influence, it was running super fine on my computer, but then I kind of wasn't thinking if I was going to do mobile or not. So when I did start testing on a phone, it started to run like trash. I still have improvements to do on it, but if you are set, like have target platforms, try and develop it on that and test it on that platform so you can see if it lags or how well or poorly it runs, because if you start releasing it and it just doesn't work at all, or if it crashes all the time because you just threw in the compatible or the port to it, then you're going to kind of regret it. And some other things like target audience, who is this for? You might just say like gamers, but that's way too broad of a statement, because that, I mean, like there's plenty of games I don't really like, but you might. It's like who are you building this for specifically? Like for what sort of genres or types of players? Because you could pick any sort of amount of people with different likes. So stability, that's also kind of with like the efficiency and compatibility. It's like, does it actually run on what you're building it for? There's many other things that you kind of like begin to realize as you're making a game and you start like testing it further. All right, so, level design.
What? Is it my turn now? Oh, okay. Well, pretty much one of the first things you need to do is, like Eli said, you need to figure out what the major features of your game are. I'm going to mostly talk about chaos theory as an example because it's what I know. So basically, once we realized we wanted to use a time-traveling mechanic, we decided it was going to be a puzzle platformer. And for that, you need your platforming staples. You need death pits, you need fall-away floors, and moving platforms, and so, general stuff like that. So we planned that out, and we knew we were going to need it. Then from there, we realized what we needed for like time travel stuff. We need stuff that would change depending on what you did in the past, so it would be different in the future. And so we came up with like extending bridges. They would fall down as ramps, generators that would blow up and they would affect things later on, and so on and so forth. With those in mind, we basically try to realize how that would work within a game, and once you know that, you're able to begin basic level design. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that there will be features added on later. Like, you'll keep working and you'll be like, man, this would be a really good idea. And you need to talk to your team and you need to be like, what can I add in here that could be interesting? Or if you have an idea and you present it to them and it works out, then great. If it doesn't, then don't take it personally. Just move forward and keep working. Basically, just try to come up with something that you think is interesting. Once you got enough of assets available, know how to use them. Basically, know how they would be able to mesh well together. Like, play with ideas as to where breakaway floors could lead to moving platforms. Try to like introduce areas where a player would have to think fast on their feet, but not too fast. Because like if it's too difficult, then it's a hard balance to hit, which you have to try by testing over and over again and trying to get it in your head. After you have a good understanding of how all these features will work together, then start level designing. And how we did it with chaos theory was we used grid paper and we laid it out based on measurements. Like 1 square would basically be the space of a person about. And we built the level from there. At least I designed the level from there. And when you start doing that, you need to kind of realize what you want the focus of the level to be. For example, if it's a beginning level, obviously we want to introduce aspects to people. Like one level would introduce moving platforms, another would introduce the bridges, and so on and so forth. Every new feature would basically get a level that was dedicated to it and would reinforce ideas within the player's head as it works. Get the basics in the player so they'll know how to use them later, and then in other levels you mesh these together and make them more complicated so players would have fun interacting with them and figuring it out. And that's basically the process of how to design a level on paper.
Touching on that a little bit too, you're saying you introduced the idea. One of the biggest examples I like to refer to for that is Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, where anytime they gave you a new item to help you like work with, the next room would be focused on you have to use this item to get out. So you could learn to use the item, and then later on in the game you could just use it however you want. so you know how it works and what it does. That's the kind of thing that I like to try and go for, is you teach the player and then you just kind of hand it over to them.
Exactly. And I mean, if there's a way that you can show a player how things work instead of just saying it, that's even better. Everyone knows Portal, right? Like, yeah, right, of course. Dumb question. Anyways, lasers and the redirection cubes. An excellent way of doing that is, like, if anyone knows about the Portal 2 editor, you can make levels there. One way that you could introduce that idea is having the redirection cube fall down onto a laser, and then the cube shows that the laser is being redirected. It's there. Player gets it immediately. They see it.
Show them how to use it first. Don't just like have some bunch of like pop-up dialogue that stops the flow. Be like, here's how this works, and here's like a bunch of pages on how it works. No, let them figure it out. That's the best way to teach a player, is them doing it.
Especially with a puzzle game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which, and as well, if anybody is thinking about going into level design as something they really want to do in the game industry, the Portal 2 level editor is a fantastic place to start practicing these ideas. Because you can put it out there and get public feedback and then start iterating your ideas and start getting pretty good at it without having to go into an engine and make assets and deal with all the other stuff along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And even still, like that sort of mentality of teach first really works well for other games too. We've been talking puzzle, but like if you are doing like a shooter and you want to introduce like new types of like gun mechanics or individual types of guns, let them like just use the gun. Don't explain how to use it. Just give it to them and let them figure it out first. Or like any sort of other mechanics. If it's like parkour type mechanics, kind of like set up a little bit of a guide, but don't let it like stop them. Let them just kind of see that they work on. Something like Titanfall kind of did that, where it's like a lot of parkouring over stuff. Like you first get just like the tiny gap to go over, but then you can kind of see what sort of bigger stuff you can kind of chain together to get going.
Anyways, once you got a general goal in mind for the level, then you just start writing it down. Wow, that's really bad advice.
Simple advice, but
you know what you want to do. You have a general plan in mind. Start implementing. Start, planning it out. Whether it's on a whiteboard, on a piece of paper, whatever it might be, have it in front of you and know where you want the player to be and what you want the level to look like. And once you have it in front of you, it's going to make it much easier to actually make it once you get to that part. When you're trying to write on a paper, have the level try to guide them if possible. Like, general indications as to where to go, but don't force it. You don't want to force someone, because then you just feel like they're in a walking simulator, and no one really likes that.
No hand holding.
Yeah, well,
one
there's
big
some
challenge.
hand holding.
I mean, yes,
Just a
but you don't
little
want to be
bit.
like, okay, jump right here, right now, and walk at this
Don't
space.
lead them by the nose, basically. And like it says at the bottom, revise, revise, revise. Don't be afraid to erase and to just start over. If you think the whole thing is crap, then toss it.
Yeah.
And just get rid of it.
Which
If you think you can fix it, then do so. But obviously, you just got to keep at it until you think it looks at a presentable level, and then you're Gucci.
One of the best ways to revise things, especially for like puzzle games, is to test it first. Going back to testing, you're gonna like think it works well on paper, then you start to play and it's like, well, this either wasn't fun or just doesn't work the way I thought it would, and then you try and adjust it from there or scrap it, which we've done plenty of levels with that. Some other types of games, like shooters, it's kind of like what works best for like cover and like the environment that you can walk around and positioning and all that. Once again, that's all testing. It's like, is there any spot that's like too overpowered that you can just stand on top of a rock with a sniper rifle, no one can kill you, or even like open world games. So that's been a big thing lately, if you've noticed. And one of the biggest problems I think with like the level design of the world, because it's just one big level, is that they don't fill it enough. Like there's like, this map is so huge, but it's like there's nothing to do in it. And that's part of the level design. It's like, yes, you made it huge, but you didn't design any interesting elements along the way or anything fun. And Breath of the Wild did a great job with it. Fallout 4 did not, so you can see the kind of spectrum.
Yep. Anyways, next slide, please.
Alright.
Okay, so you finally got the assets made, an actual engine, and you're ready to start building the level. You got your design in hand, you know what you're going to do, just use the engine. And you need to get familiar with the engine. You need to make sure how it works. You need to know its ins and outs to an extent in order to make the level. I mean, you gotta learn in order to do this, of course. Just luckily, because you've already designed the level at this point, you don't have to do it completely in your head. You can just transfer the design to the game at this point. So, yay, hooray for planning. Of course, you might notice some discrepancies between the design and when you're actually making the level. Try to correct it just as needed. And one thing to also keep in mind is that it might be months at a time between the time you see, well, you made the design originally and then you finally get to making it in engine. So you might not quite remember what you were doing here, and you'll be like, why did I do this here? Eventually it'll come back to you. It's like riding a bike. But if it doesn't, then fix it. Design around it, basically. As for the actual process of making the level in the engine, I start pretty simply with the floors, the walls, the ceiling, and then like the normal platforms. The basic bare bones of the level. And once that's there, I move into the more complex stuff. Moving platforms, bridges, time-related interactables, all that. And the more complex it is, the later I add it in. And then once all there, I copy and paste the level and do it again because I have to design the level 3 times. Thanks for that, Eli.
It was originally 4, so you're welcome.
But anyways, yeah. It's also a pain in paper design because you have to keep in mind where the player is going to be, especially in a puzzle game, because you don't want them to just cheat out of it. You want to give them multiple solutions, obviously, because that's fun. It's great if there's more than one way to solve a puzzle, because then you get that big brain moment. But yeah, but you got to be careful, because if they could just get out of it, then that just ruins the magic of it all. You want them to experience it, right? So you got to be really meticulous about it.
And that's where testing comes in as well.
Yes.
So as soon as you get players in there, I mean, they will find every way that you don't want for them to break your game, every time.
It's great.
And that's why iteration is so important, no matter what games you're making.
Yeah.
Well, next point, as with any group project, that's right, you're back at school, it never ends. Communication is key. You just talk. You need to talk with them. If you find a problem, mention it. If you think that there might be issues going forward with a certain design choice or a feature in the game, talk about it. Don't just shut up about it. You need to make sure your opinion is heard, even if you think, it might not be anything in the end. But still, there's a little something there, mention it.
Yeah, we have weekly team meetings, so keep everyone coordinated on page with each other. If you are working it solo, then communicate with yourself in a different way, I guess. Like, think about it from a different perspective, really. Like, you think it's fine, but then if you kind of like look at it a different way, you might realize, oh, here's these flaws. Even like the revision and testing, that really helps point out things, especially if other people play it, because they'll break it, they'll be like, hey, this isn't working right, whatever. Then you click, okay, then I have to adjust the level in X, Y, Z ways.
Which leads to my final point, which has already been talked to death, but to test. Play it until you're sick of it, and then keep playing it some more.
Yeah, you're going to hate your game by the end, but hopefully other people will love it.
Yeah, and that's also leads into, you might think it's great. If a lot of people think it's not, then you've got an issue and you need to resolve it. You need to get it into other people's hands. This is vital. Vital.
Yeah, you're making the game for other people, don't make it just for yourself. Think that just because you think it's fun doesn't mean everyone else will.
Yeah. And that about covers level design.
So moving on to one of the other technically optional points of game design, but definitely something that I've talked to a lot of people about is writing. And the job of the lead writer is not what you might think, to be honest, because it is not script level. I've talked to a lot of people who want to get into the game design industry, me included, who came in thinking, I want to be a lead writer because I want to be on this project, and I want to write all the characters, and I want to make this story really, really interesting. But your job as a lead writer is really to oversee a team of writers who are on the script level, unless you are the only writer, obviously. But if you're going into the AAA industry or in any larger company, If that's your career goal, you're going to be in more of an editing and overseeing kind of role. And so your thing, if you want to do lead writing, is the World Bible, which is very important if you have any like complex story elements in your game. So what are the rules? If you're developing a massive RPG and you want to develop a magic system where it like saps your life force when you cast magic, well, that can have some really big implications for the rest of the team. Now, the art department has to design characters that get older when they cast magic. You've got to have the programmers implement that feature in. You've got to have the writers write around characters that are aging rapidly, things like that. So, putting that in as early as possible, that can have really big effects on the rest of the team.
Actually, to touch on World Bible too, a lot of that is kind of like when you start to think of the game, that's the kind of stuff you want to put first. Like, here's the major things, and here's kind of how they affect the rest, and we need to keep this consistent or make just maybe small adjustments. You don't want to change it too much. It feels like it's not working out, then you may need to just scrap it as well.
Yeah. The next biggest thing is also characters, because that also plays into the design choices that everyone else is going to have to make. If you've got a character who, they're a potion seller and they want to sell potions because they want to heal people, then then the art department has to think, okay, well, what kind of other NPCs will be in the shop? How do we design around this? Things like that. So ultimately, all of this stuff comes down to what do you want to communicate to the rest of your team, and how can you do it in a really effective way.
Potions are too powerful for you. Does anybody get that reference?
I would hope we could get their reference.
Better.
But and the other thing is too is what do you want to convey to your players in your world? What do you want to change in the world as the story progresses? What kind of dynamic things do you want players to experience that are results of their choices or NPC interactions or anything like that? All that stuff needs to go in a very centralized place that the team can just Control F if they have a question and refer to this really big thing that you've put together. And the other thing with writing is no matter what kind of writing you do, you will be done early. Writing is the earliest thing to finish in the entire game development process, because it is the least expensive thing to change at the beginning and the most expensive thing to change at the end. Because if you need to change, for example, a part of the script early, you spend 10 minutes on a Word document, you edit it, and it's done. But if you have to change it late, suddenly you got to get the voice actor back in, you got to rebuy studio time, you got to get your sound department back in to cut off all the stuff and clean up the audio, and then you got to get the animators to change the mouth actions, all this stuff. So if you want to do writing in a AAA sense, then it is very likely that if it's a stable AAA project, that you'll start working on the sequel before anyone else. But if you're an indie, you're going to need a different job. And for me, that's sound design, which I will touch on after we talk about some of the script level writing stuff. Why are we standing now? Because I want to stand. I made a life decision. All right. So basically, when you're writing scripts, you got to keep in mind as to who your characters are. Big surprise! Who could have guessed? An example that I like to use here is basically the narrator for our game in Chaos Theory. You start off with a VI who's very similar to, I guess, compared to Microsoft Sam that can speak. Dear Lord, the implications. But they eventually progress into an AI. They gain enough computing power that they gain a personality. The AI, I like to compare more to Guilty Spark. He's kind of single-minded in that he really wants to test and he cares about the facility stuff. Obviously, he cares about the player to an extent as to, how well he can be used to complete his goals. So you need to keep in mind as to what a VI is going to say. It's very simplistic stuff. It's more like switches getting flipped and saying stuff about, I don't know, comments about monkeys sometimes, and you're like, what do monkeys have to do with this? And it's just done for levity at some point, which I'll talk about later in the list, as you can see. And then the AI gets a bit more quippish. It actually reacts to things because it can think. It's not switches being flipped anymore, it's a personality. So yeah, keep that in mind when you're writing for your characters.
The next thing is utilize parts of the level for dialogue. Since again, it's a puzzle game that I'm talking about, use the dialogue to try and guide the player to an extent. Don't like force it, because again, no one likes being told what to do. No one, ever.
No hand holding.
Yeah. Well, I said a little bit. You give them hints. Give them little tidbits. Like
No.
guide them.
They gotta
Don't
be real gamers, real hardcore gamers, real hardcore gamers.
guide them. Don't force
Gamers
them.
rise up. You're a gamer, rise right now. I know you're gamers.
Stop. As to the next thing, there will be moments where you need to set the mood, and you need to kind of realize when to do that. It's more of an instinctual kind of thing, and you need to practice. You need to practice your writing and to try and get better at it. And to get better at that, you need feedback, which I'll talk about later. But some key tips. The beginning of a scene is pretty important. Depending on whether it's comedic or serious, you're setting a tone there. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And other key moments in the story, depending on their tone, will also continue to set that theme. So there's your tips. As for the last thing, this is a pretty common phenomenon, and you'll roll your eyes at this, but you'll hate your writing. You will, because you'll be working on it over and over again, and you'll look at this, you'll compare it to other stuff, and you'll think this is garbage. And it's something you'll need to get over, because it most likely isn't. Just write. If you think you can make improvements, do so. Trust yourself to an extent, but get other people to look at it. Get other people to give their thoughts and their opinions, and to see where they like things, and to try to do more of what they say. You know, well,
So we kind of
again,
hit
to an
that.
extent.
We kind of hit that when we did some testing with our game. Was some of the early dialogue was a bit too lengthy at times, so like we kind of went back and said, all right, let's try and shorten this down.
Yeah.
Type stuff.
Cut out the fat when you need to, and yeah, trust yourself.
Alright.
Stand in.
I like it. It's fun. But yeah, so with the whole writing thing, like I said, you're going to need to find a different job if you're part of an indie company. You know, we only have 4 people, and we didn't have anybody doing sound design for quite a while. So once the writing portion was finished up, I jumped in on that. And this will probably be our shortest segment, because sound design can be a very complex topic. There are as many ways to do sounds as there are games. You know, tons of people have different setups, different monitors, they use different speakers, different synthesizers, all this stuff. But that's also not necessary. You know, to get started on sound design, really all you need is something to record your sound. You can use something as simple as a phone microphone or your computer microphone, as long as you can get some kind of sound in, and an audio processing software. I use a software called Audacity, which is open source, it's free to use, and you can get in right away and start just experimenting with the tools and seeing what you can do to make your sounds sound good and sound authentic. If you're going for an 8-bit or 16-bit experience, there's Chiptone and SFXer and VFXer, which can generate sounds based on certain parameters that you input. Those are also a great tool for getting to know different overlays that you can do for your audio. Things like waveform and sawtooth that completely change the way an audio sounds. And you need to get really good at using your ear and hearing sounds within other sounds. You know, if you're just getting started on sound design, you don't have the budget to go out and blow up a stick of dynamite and record it and then put it in your game. You got to start figuring out, okay, well, can I hit a trash can, a metal trash can, and then manipulate it a little bit so that it sounds more like an explosion? One of the examples that I love to use is that for climbing a rope, we weren't able to put a rope into the ceiling and record pulling on it to get that kind of rope creaking sound. But I ended up using a Rubik's Cube. If you grip a Rubik's Cube really tight and start twisting it just a little bit, it'll start making that kind of creaky noise. So your ear is your best tool as a sound designer. So if that's a route that you are interested in, I would highly suggest that you go home tonight and just start recording stuff and messing around with it in some free software, just to start getting an ear for how you can manipulate sounds and what you can do. Because sound is very important and it's ubiquitous. Your game should never ever be silent, because that's weird and it creeps people out. So there should always be sound, so you should always be training your ear if that's something that you're interested in.
Along with like kind of testing and figuring out sound, a lot of layering of different sounds can give you really unique effects. One of the best ones we've heard is from Doom.
Oh yeah, in Doom, the 2016 Doom, the sound of the Mancubus exploding was they took a raw steak, slathered it in honey, stuck it into a vuvuzela, and then blew that into a vat of cold soup. And that's the sound that you get when you blow up a Mancubus. So it can be very weird, but very, very fun.
Yeah.
Foley
So-
sound effects are really cool.
Mhm.
That's the end result.
Don't be afraid to just start taking things and start slapping together, doing weird shit, and just have messing around. It's like, hey, this sounds kind of cool and interesting. I might use it for this. And 'cause you don't know what's going to happen. Like, would you expect it that? Take out a steak covered in what's wrong with the sound design? They used a chainsaw as the main instrument in that game.
What do you mean wrong? That's right.
I mean, yes, it's right, but also that's not an instrument. Mayonnaise is an instrument.
I think it's the end point of the steak slathered in honey and into a soup and
No, it's like, how do you come up, like, what sort of drugs are you on? How can I get these
The
drugs?
right ones. Obviously.
Anyway, so Connor, our artist, had some points to talk about, but I'll kind of cover art too, because I do take care of a lot of the art too myself. But a lot of it is communicating with the team about like what is the style you're going for and how do you keep it consistent. Especially like you have to kind of refer back to like the lead designer or lead artist for that. So if you have a team of like a dozen artists, and all of them have their own like personal style, you don't want to mix those styles because otherwise your game will just kind of look like, what is even happening? What acid trip am I on? But you know, you communicate with everyone, make sure like you go to the other artists and see like, okay, are we matching? Are we on the same point? Is this the style of the game and stuff? You know, like even when you're just building individual assets, as I said, at this point, when world building, make sure everything's the same style. Trial and error. There's plenty of times where Connor, like, he would make something, but it's like, oh, this is actually too detailed. It's not quite what we're looking for, so I have to kind of go back and redo it. That's also something that you need to think about when making your own art in your own game is, am I being consistent? And does this work? Does it look right? Is this kind of what I intended? He says to start on paper first. I agree for certain art styles in certain games, like yes, like kind of testing it out, especially with like concept art and character designs. That gives you the idea of what it's going to look like before you actually make it. You can easily just go and Google like concept art and just kind of see like paintings that kind of give the impression of the game, like what's the world and stuff. Or even character designs, it's usually like you'll see them just T-pose on paper, but from different sides, usually front, back, side, top. But you can see kind of some of the details and what they're going to look like before you actually just start making it. Be like, oh, I actually don't like this. You can plan it out first. Save the work anyway. Like if you do make something that's like, oh, this is too much or not enough for this game, save it because you know you're probably going to make another game after the first one, and then it's like, oh, this game's going to be more detailed. I've got these very detailed character models or environment pieces that I can actually use, and they're done. So if you make something, keep it. Always expect the unexpected. As an art, if any of you are artists, then you probably know, like, you might be working on something, you might, like, make something that's, like, oh, like, not intentionally really great or not so great. Art is very subjective and tricky and takes a lot of time and practice to get good with, so you might end up making something better or even different than what you're expecting, and you might use it somewhere else or in a different way, or it's art. It's very tricky to kind of get good with and understand, but a lot of practice can help, and even getting other eyes on it can help keep it the way you need it to be. It's never perfect though. Like I said, it's subjective, so you might look at your art, and like we've talked about, you're going to hate the game, you're going to hate your writing, well, you might even end up hating your art. but it's what you need it to be. It's like, I spent hours on this, I'm sick of looking at this character art, but it's what I needed for the game. You're not going to get it right the first time. We've done a lot of like revisions on environment pieces, or even texturing for a game. Alright, game design. My shtick, why I'm doing this, my reason to live. It's also my reason why I'm trying to end it all. Because game design is very tricky and it's also very subjective. Everyone will have their own opinion on what's good, what's bad. A lot of that is from influence and inspiration from other games. A lot of my top games that I refer to for good design, for mechanics, or even level design and stuff are like Legend of Zelda, Dark Souls, Portal, even Minecraft. I actually think is a good jumping point for game design elements. And like I said, it's inspiration. So go out and play games too. If you are making a game that's going to take up a lot of your free time, but still try and sit down and just play other random games, even for just a little bit, get a feel for them. And you'll see what's good and what's bad about them. You can go and read what other people thought was bad about them, and then you can learn from their mistakes. You will see what worked, why does this mechanic work, why do people enjoy it, why didn't they enjoy it? And you can even plan out in your head, how can we fix this? How can we fix these sort of things? And you can kind of do it in your head, even if it never actually happens, because it's not your game. You can at least learn from it and have it affect your game, implement sort of those changes into your homework. Study those games, look through everything, not just the mechanics, but everything we've talked about, the level design, how they kind of pace the story and stuff, all the artwork, just everything. If you're going to be the designer, you need to be on top of all these things. These need to be what you're focused on. That's why we have weekly meetings, because I go through with everyone's what have you been doing, and here's what you're going to do next, and here's why this is working, here's why it's not, here's what we're going to change, here's what we're going to add, here's what we're going to move. And a lot of that is just learning from other games and also keeping your vision clear. Alright, indie game design. Biggest thing is scope. A lot of indie game designers will try and make the next Skyrim, and that is the worst idea ever. If you're trying to make some big game, stop it right now. You're going to hate yourself because you're never going to finish that by yourself. So the best idea we kind of have is take your idea and half it. Get rid of half of everything. And now do that again. And do it one more time. I'm serious. If you have this huge game with a dozen mechanics, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, just to take our example too, I mean, when we started out with making Chaos Theory, we thought, okay, it'll probably take the four of us about a year to build this. Simple puzzle game, 15 levels, we'll do it. And it's been 3 years, and we're releasing in December. Mm-hmm. So, because we didn't think about what would go into that. We didn't think about, oh, well, we have time mechanics, so we have to build every level 3 times. And how difficult is it to make puzzles for that? We need to get people to play test that, and we need to iterate. So all of these things are going to take more and more time. So the simpler your idea is, the better it is as a starting point, especially if you are working solo or with a really small team.
Everybody wants to be the next Halo or Cyberpunk 2077. You don't have a team that large.
Yeah.
Look at the credits, they got 100 or more people. Well, the best place to start is don't think about making a giant open world game with a bunch of things. Just think about one solid thing. A lot of the games I like to refer to for this are things like super hot. What's super hot is just time moves when you move. That's it. There's smaller things around it too, like the weapons and stuff, but it's just focused on that one core idea. So do that. Get one idea and stick to that.
If you have one feature that you've done really well, you're probably going to have a really good game.
Yeah,
a lot of successful indie games are based off of just this one core thing. One of the biggest things I like to think about for testing is 3 or 5 testing as I call it, where when you're developing it, you have if there's a mechanic that has kind of multiple things to it, multiple smaller things, keep it to 3 or 5 for testing. With Chaos Theory, we originally had 4 time zones. It's okay, this is too much, let's cut it down to 3. You might be testing with 4 and be okay, I might want to add 1 more. With my Eartha's Influence game, I have 5 different tiles in it. So kind of keep it simple, like restrict it a bit. Don't think about making a dozen spells. Keep it to just a few simple ones if you have a game that's based off spells. Vertical slice. This is where prototyping really kind of comes in importance. If you can make the prototype like just a nice solid version of the game, it doesn't have this beautiful art, beautiful sound, just here's the core mechanics and it plays well. If you can do that in like about a week or two, then evolve it from there. If it takes longer than that, you probably need to scrap it because it's going to be way too big. So if you can do it like within a short time, maybe a month at most, then it's good. Keep going with it. But if it's taking longer, then it's way too big for you. And try not to add anything too major, too big, unless you really feel like this is super important. We have had that happen recently, and we've added a pretty big thing to our game, which I'm not going to say what just yet because it's not ready. But yeah, just try to keep it simple. If you feel like you have added too much, definitely start chopping it down a bit more when needed. Alright, so we're pretty low on time though, but
Yeah, we'd probably take a couple of questions
Yeah.
if anyone has.
maybe unless they kick us out.
Okay, you in the glasses?
Yeah.
When it comes to game design, through my experience, I've found that it's like really difficult to actually learn how to do it in a quick pace. What would be your recommendations for like learning how to do that doesn't require spending 10 years making games?
A lot of it is like learning from like just seeing other games or listening to other people's views on games, whether good or bad.
Yeah, and if you want to start iterating quickly as well, I would say download Game Maker Studio because the drag and drop mechanics on that are very easy to learn. It's difficult to make something complex with it, but it's really easy to start with a base. It's got all you put an object in the game. Okay, you click on that object, and it gives you a whole list of things you can add to the object. And it lets you learn it in a very visual way before you just jump into the hardcore coding stuff. So as far as design, I would start with that, and then start moving into the more complex code stuff. Unity tutorials. The Unity website has tons of tutorials on pretty much every aspect of the engine. So if you want to learn how to implement 3D moving sounds and the Doppler effect and all this stuff, it is available. You just have to know where to go to start.
Kind of take it one step at a time. Just implement the sound even if it's not like 3D or anything. Just get it in there and start kind of stepping through. Here's where I need to get it to be if it's 3D or have other effects to it.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, you with the tattoos.
Yeah,
you
got it
were
first.
yeah.
What is the fourth time zone that y'all didn't do?
It was going to be a pass mechanic, but we
Oh,
kind
okay.
of thought that wasn't.
Yeah,
right.
there wasn't enough that was different about it
Mm-hmm.
because the game takes place in a testing facility. So we thought, well, the pass is just going to be the same facility, so it doesn't. There wasn't enough meaningful to make us spend time on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's
To be
why we
honest,
scrapped
my
it.
original vision was like you're gonna end up like in some old town or somewhere outside, but it's like okay, that's a lot of other art and models.
Tons of
Yeah,
new art.
would have
Yeah,
added
too
so
much.
much in. It was a feature that we very much realized early on that we needed to cut.
Yeah, just like doing the future stuff, it's like we can take this present stuff and just kind of evolve it and like have it deteriorate and get older and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can just do one more.
You with
before
the
we finish.
horns.
Yeah, so 0 to 1 game, right? What would you say, like, really is something that'll carry you through that? Kind of, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, you go from being a person who's, like, interested in games and, like, interested in game design, but, like, you're not really confident in your ability. What takes you, or what is, like, a good mantra to get you from 0 games to having 1 game?
Just do it honestly, like
Yeah.
we just jumped in. We're
Yeah.
gonna do a much bigger game, but I was like, okay, we just
I would say my biggest thing is definitely that even Bill Gates started with programming Hello World. So, there's always baby steps and always, it'll always take time to learn, but everybody had to do that. So, for me, well, I taught myself sound design, but I got a reference book and, just started from there. So,
even if you just try and recreate it, like Super Mario Brothers on your own, just keep it simple. Like it's not something I would always play. It can be something to help you start.
Unfortunately, we seem to be out of time.
You're probably going to kick us out.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, we'll be around.
We'll be up front for a bit. We got business cards.
Thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, check us out.
Sorry for